Peter Bruegel the Elder's The Harvesters is part of a series of 6 seasonal paintings, each one representing a particular season. This one depicts the Dutch wheat harvest of the late summer. At first glance, it's a simple landscape that illustrates everyday pastoral life. But if we take a closer look, we'll see that it's actually a deeply humanist and intricately composed work of art. The Harvesters is easily identifiable as a Dutch Renaissance painting. Indeed, it carries all the hallmarks of a work of that period. The Dutch Renaissance is characterized by frequent use of oil paints, and the Harvesters is an oil-on-wood painting. The movement is also especially famous for its landscapes, and the Harvesters is sometimes referred to as the first modern landscape. Also typical of the Dutch Renaissance are genre paintings, which represent scenes from everyday life. This is a prototypical genre painting. It depicts ordinary people engaged in common activities. It also has another important characteristic of the genre painting. The people in the Harvesters cannot be identified. It's not showing a specific person or even a specific group of people. It's relaying everyday realities anonymously and authentically. The very idea of the genre painting comes from the humanist movement. Humanism was an intellectual movement that developed in 14th century Florence with the poet and scholar Francesco Petrarch. Petrarch argued that the thinkers and artists of his time should follow the examples set by classical Greek and Roman scholars, and that human life was a subject worthy of being studied. So, humanism ushered in a great change in subjects in European art. Instead of exclusively representing biblical figures like they did in the Middle Ages, paintings could now show the human experience without any further pretensions. This is exactly what genre paintings do. They represent scenes from everyday life. In this way, The Harvesters is a direct product of Renaissance humanism. It's fair to say that Bruegel's very subject was inspired by the works of Virgil, a Roman author widely read by Renaissance humanists. Virgil was famous for his celebrations of pastoral life. 2 of his 3 great works, the Georgics and the Bucolics, celebrate agriculture. The painting's commission also places it in the Renaissance. The Harvesters, and the series that goes with it, were commissioned by a wealthy Dutch patron, Nicolaes Jongelink. Patronage was a very important dimension of Renaissance art. Patrons supported artists financially and in return received artworks tailored to their commissions. These artworks brought them fame and prestige within their communities. Jongelink, for example, commissioned the Harvesters for his palace, where it would be a symbol of wealth, culture, and power. Historically speaking, The Harvesters is a Dutch Renaissance painting that contains many humanist themes. But it would be reductive to leave it at just that. By analyzing the painting itself, we can see that humanist thought is very strongly reflected artistically in The Harvesters. Let's start by dividing the painting in a few ways. Here we can see the foreground with the main subjects, peasants harvesting wheat and resting under a tree. Next, here's the middle ground. Bruegel uses this vast expanse of rolling fields of wheat to divide the painting. The calm fields serve as a much-needed contrast to the busy foreground and background. This is the background, which is a very interesting part of the painting that we will look into more in depth later on. Finally, we have the horizon, a Dutch coastline with merchant ships sailing out into the North Sea. Let's divide the painting again. The panel is divided by this central tree into 2 halves. Bruegel uses this division to depict the harvest from a humanist perspective. It is meant to be read as a process from left to right. On the left, we have the raw materials, the unharvested wheat fields. On the right, we have the products, the harvested wheat. If we look even more closely, we see that the right side is further divided into 2 more steps, sorting the wheat into sheaves and stacking the sheaves into stooks. In true humanist fashion, Bruegel studies a human activity, the harvest, and depicts it in a detailed, step-by-step way. Let's take a look at the main subject, the harvesters resting under the central tree. They're also divided by the tree. On the left, one farmer is sleeping, exhausted by the physical labor going on the left side. On the right is a group of farmers eating and drinking happily. Now the real detail is seen here. The harvesters are eating pears which were picked from the tree right behind them. It's these minute details that Bruegel weaves into his piece that show his humanist fascination with depicting everyday life as precisely as possible. It's also these very details that transport us into his canvas and into his world. When we're done looking at the foreground, our eyes don't just wander around the canvas aimlessly. Bruegel has drawn a path for us to follow. We naturally follow the narrowing linear perspective in this passage through the field. So, Bruegel wants us to look at this area of the painting. He wants us to be like these birds, which represent our gaze and act as guides. These guide birds are a recurrent theme in the series. In the panel that represents winter, Bruegel also uses these birds to draw us away from the foreground and into the background. This is because hidden in the background are the richest and most interesting parts of Bruegel's paintings. Let's go through the background left to right. Here we see a nobleman or his guard chasing fruit thieves who have left their ladder behind. We know he's affiliated with the nobility because of this, the castle right behind him, a symbol of the nobility. Moving on to the right, we see monks bathing in a pool. Just like he did with the harvest, Bruegel depicts this everyday bathing scene in great step-by-step detail. Each bather embodies one precise step of bathing. The first is clothed, the second is unclothed, the third is lowering himself in the water, the fourth is dipping his toes in, the fifth is in the water, and the sixth is swimming. This scene is the ultimate humanist statement. Bruegel's artistic lens has changed so much that even when he looks at the monk, an obviously religious subject, he only sees human nature and endeavor to study. That is true humanism. Next, Bruegel shows a group of children playing cock-throw, a popular blood sport at the time. People took turns throwing objects at a live chicken, and the first one to kill it won the game. This scene is simply observing the everyday entertainment of the people. Finally, in the final scene of the painting, merchant ships go out to sea at a typical Dutch port. It's interesting to note that the Dutch were a great 16th century maritime and commercial power, and that one of their biggest exports was wheat. So, this final scene really ties together the painting when you realize that the wheat being harvested in the foreground is the same wheat that will be shipped right here in the background. The Harvester's historical context, subject, and composition show that it's a deeply humanist painting. It's a detailed study of the human life that perfectly conveys the humanist appreciation for the human experience. However, it's possible that despite all of his objective realism, Bruegel couldn't resist adding a little wink, a little bit of social commentary to his painting. In the Harvesters, we see all three orders, the nobles, the clergy, and everyone else, but only everyone else is doing anything. They're the ones harvesting the wheat and selling it at sea. The nobles aren't protecting their country, they're chasing fruit thieves. The clergy isn't praying, it's bathing. It's these little nods, things like the harvesters eating pears from the tree in the background, that really make the painting come alive for me. It feels like it has tons of little secrets, of little idiosyncrasies, that give it personality and that bring me inside it.